This is the overview for Module 2 on ecosystems and habitat. We will start this module by looking at the UN Environmental Programme Sustainable Development Goals report uh, for 2019 and 2020. We'll look specifically at Goal 15, Life on Land, which has to do with protecting, restoring, and promoting sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystems, sustainably managed forest, combating desertification, and halting and reversing land degradation and biodiversity loss. We will find that land degradation is affecting 1/5 of the Earth's land area and the lives of 1 billion people. We'll talk about that over the course of this module a little bit. We'll see that biodiversity loss is happening at an accelerated rate. The risk of species of extinction has worsened by almost 10% over the last 20 years, 25 years. But we'll also see some good news that more of each key biodiversity area is protected. In terrestrial areas, freshwater areas, and mountainous areas between 20 and 2018. There's been an increase in each biodiversity area that's protected. So that's some good news. We'll talk about ecosystem services, and I'm going to take a moment now to just explain what ecosystem services are. These are the services that ecosystems provide to humans. And so they're basically the benefits that people obtain from ecosystems, and they really roughly fall into 4 categories: supporting services like photosynthesis, biodiversity or habitat. They fall into provisioning services such as food, fresh water, fish, or lumber. Regulating services such as pollination, flood control, carbon storage, clean air, and then the sort of more intangible cultural services such as beauty, tourism, human health, and recreation that result from ecosystem services. So one of the key things that we'll think about in this module is that it is possible to design built landscapes for ecosystem services, to design them to provide ecosystem services. So we might design a built landscape in a suburb or in a city that involves trees or constructed wetlands or stormwater ponds, et cetera. And even though those are not natural settings, like nature, like you would find in the mountains or in the forest, they still are providing ecosystem services such as global climate regulation, air and water cleansing, human health and well-being benefits, and cultural benefits. And this is really one of the sort of main theoretical concepts of the Sustainable Sites Initiative that we'll talk about in this module, and that's that built landscapes can provide ecosystem services. So here's a listing from one of the readings that you'll be doing for this module. This is showing the various ecosystem services and specifically what they do for people. And we can look at a tree, for instance, and a tree at different times of the year. In the spring, the tree will absorb heat. It will provide habitat for birds to nest. It'll sequester carbon. It will reduce atmospheric pollutants such as carbon dioxide and nitrous oxides. It will protect and build and restore soils. And it will provide opportunities for recreation, whether it's kids playing underneath it or people picnicking underneath it. The leaves that fall off the tree will result in nutrient deposition on the soils and will enrich the soils. And rain that falls on the leaves will get, some of it will get intercepted before it meets the ground, and it'll be evaporated or transpirated by the tree leaves. So, one tree can provide quite a bit in the way of ecosystem services, which you can see here in this top diagram and what we saw in the previous diagram. But, a whole street full of trees really starts to provide even more ecosystem services. And at the city scale, an increased urban forestry, a forest canopy can reduce the urban heat island effect. It can reduce urban particulate pollution, and it can reduce stormwater runoff and increase infiltration of stormwater. So we'll talk in detail about some of these things in the upcoming module. But it's important also to note that ecosystem services have a value, and the value is quite high. One study estimated that ecosystem services worldwide, the value of them is greater than the worldwide gross domestic product. So even though we don't put these ecosystem services into our bottom line balance sheets, they have a tremendous value. So for instance, in the Green Bay metropolitan area, this study by the US Forest Service found that, that just in the Green Bay metropolitan area, not a really big city, that the trees provided $6.1 million per year in ecosystem services, $1.878 million in stormwater runoff reduction, 2.2 in property value increases, almost 300,000 in air quality improvement, 1.8 million in energy savings from the buildings that are shaded by the trees in the summertime, and $230,000 worth of CO2 reduction. So this is pretty substantial. So ecosystem services matter. This module will also talk about principles of landscape ecology and how the landscape structure is made up of patches, corridors, and mosaics and matrices that allow for the health of those ecological systems in the area. And we'll talk about also urban ecological systems as well. We'll look at the book drawdown and some of the strategies related to habitat and biodiversity that can start to address some issues of climate change related to habitat and biodiversity, everything from peat bogs to perennial biomass, to rainforest habitat, to wetland habitat. We'll also talk about sustainable sites and the Sustainable Sites Initiative, this voluntary rating system that is really working toward ecological health, ecosystem services, and other aspects of sustainable sites that we'll address at other times during this course. We'll look at different ways that one could design on the land in order to preserve the landscape ecology structure, how to maybe obtain the same development outcome, but with a very different structure, this being conservation development, this being standard development, where oftentimes trees are completely removed, habitat is completely removed. And then we'll look at how to measure built landscapes for their performance and metrics. So for instance, this image is showing various trees in a built landscape that were measured for the amount of stormwater they took up within a day, the gallons per day per tree in this landscape. And this landscape performance helps us really understand whether the sustainable sites that we design are truly sustainable and how they're functioning on a daily or monthly or yearly basis. And if ecosystem services are being provided as we think they are. And then we'll finish the module with some work related to nature, health, and well-being. Specifically, we will focus on biophilia and biophilic design. This is an human affinity for nature. And the health and well-being benefits that come from being in nature and how we can design um, landscapes and buildings for that. Excuse me. Lastly, we'll talk about sorry, these are the learning objectives for Module 2. I'll just let you look these over. This is basically what we've talked about today, and I look forward to working with you on this module.